It was in the basement of my best friend's house on her parents' computer when must have been 12 or 13. We were both really into Star Wars, and we discovered a website that was full of stories about Star Wars. And we just sat next to each other in the dark looking at them.
Do you remember what any of the stories were specifically about?
It was right around the time that The Phantom Menace came out, which is the first prequel, and they were about Obi-Wan Kenobi from that era.
Emily, what was yours?
I was on LiveJournal, and I found some kind of like Harry Potter story, and I didn't really know what fan fiction was, so I was like, did somebody, like, what is this? Is this like a project that somebody did? And it was this huge, like, multi-thousand word AU for Harry Potter. And I just could not believe what I was reading. I was like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And I also was on my family computer on dial-up. And I'm sure my parents were yelling at me to get off the computer so they could use the phone. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So excellent, excellent times.
100%. This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anna Helen Peterson.
I'm Emily. I go by Fervent Rabbit under the various fanfiction places, and I'm a fanfiction writer and co-host of Mind the Tags podcast.
And I'm V. I go by V Against or V Against the Day, depending on how many characters I'm allowed in my screen name. And I am the other co-host of the Mind the Tags podcast.
You know, one of the things that I want to even like to take steps back from, part of the thrill when you are a big fan of something and discover fan fiction is like, you love this thing so much, you just want more of it, right? And there are these constraints of the text as it exists. And then when you find out that there's more, not just a little bit more, but a lot more, it's like so gratifying in so many different ways. For me, in my experience, this is not technically fan fiction per se, but I think actually we could make an argument in some ways. Like, my brother was very into Star Wars novels and very into the classifications between canon and non-canon. And I got really into Star Trek The Next Generation novels. Which go in so many different directions. And I've talked on this podcast before about like how influential the Star Trek novel Imzadi is, which like imagines this whole backstory between Riker and Deanna Troi and like what their connection, just fleshes it out in ways that like pushed all of these buttons in my head. I was like, there's always an iceberg underneath every character that you encounter in the narrative constraints.
Was it an official novel?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, so not, you know, it's related. They're cousins to what we're talking about.
Very closely related, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
I was also really into the Star Wars novels around that age, so.
And just like the fact that you have so many, right? Like just like you look at someone's shelves who has all of them and you're like, I can have all of these? Like all, like I can read for this long. It's really amazing.
There's more of this thing I love.
And there's more of it in my own brain, which then I can put out onto physical paper and or a screen.
Exactly.
And now I
don't have to be George Lucas to do it.
Yes. No. So today's episode has been a long time coming. I think we got our first request for a fan fiction episode back in March of last year. And then Emily reached out after our episode on queer romance. And you were just like, I really liked the episode. My friend and I do this podcast and like maybe you'd want to know about it. And I was like, yes. And also, will you come on the show?
Hooray.
So
although I want to say that we were like fan fiction expert. I'm like, I mean, if by expert you mean avid reader, writer, and enthusiast, then yes, that's me.
Yes, that's expert. So can you tell us about your podcast, Mind the Tags?
Sure. So I started it with another fanfic pal who life got lifey. And so now V is with me. And V and I met in the Our Flag Means Death fandom, of which we are still a part. And so we host a podcast called Mind the Tags, and we really, every time we have an episode, we talk about a topic that is related to fan fiction in some way. So we've done episodes about Kirk and Spock because that was one of the really big original / pairings. We've done an episode about alternate universes. We've done episodes about sort of like the internet and the evolution of fan fiction on the internet. And then we also interview people, which is my favorite thing to do. So we interview all kinds of folks, fandom journalists, creators, writers, podfickers. And I just love like listening to what they have to say and learning about their experiences with fan fiction too.
V, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just really excited when Emily was asking for a co-host because I love talking about this stuff. Yeah. I also love Emily, so wanted to talk more.
Hey, wait, late breaking on the pod.
It's been an enemies to lover arc, but here we are.
So we're going to try with this podcast. This is a difficult needle to thread, but we want this to be accessible to people who aren't as familiar, but then also interesting to people who are very familiar. Mm-hmm. That's the dream. So we're gonna hope for it.
We try to do that on ours too. It's like we do a word of the day every time too, to like kind of go like, what's this word mean? Because it's like there's a lot of jargon and lingo sometimes, and you kind of want to break it down. So we'll definitely try to do that. Yeah,
and I think one way that we can start today is to describe like what is the landscape of fanfic on the internet right now? Like, how would you describe it? Where does it live? How is it changing? You can go anywhere you want with this.
Yeah, V, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, like all of our internet usage, it is constantly evolving. It moves from site to site. When we first got started, I think of our age, it was people's individual sites, things like web forums, like GeoCities pages. Yep. Moved on to LiveJournal and similar kind of like blogging type websites. And there was also a website called fanfiction.net, which was one of the first that collected a lot of different fandoms together in one place. And now probably the biggest, although fanfiction.net still has a lot, as does a website called Wattpad. But probably the biggest now is Archive of Our Own, which has a huge collection of all these different fandoms. They've absorbed and joined with a lot of those smaller individual fandom forums. And they're a nonprofit. They actually have an academic journal, which we can talk about if we get into more about like the academic side of fanfic. But they are, I would say, from my perspective, the gold standard place to go to look for fanfic. I'm not as familiar with Wattpad, so I'm sorry if I'm Wattpad slandering, but to me, Archive of Our Own is the least chaotic and the easiest to find what you're looking for. They have an excellent tagging system that really helps you narrow it down. If you're like, I want to read a fanfic about this specific episode of TNG where Riker was like doing something that I really loved,
Sitting
you
on
can
a
even
chair
look for that
in an
kind of
interesting
tag.
way.
Yeah, exactly. If he, like Riker sitting on chairs is almost certainly a tag that's on Archive of Our Own. Yeah.
Guaranteed.
So I think that where we're at right now is Archive of Our Own, though some fandoms are still in that like single forum, very particular for our fandom type of website.
So when like Melody sends me a link to this like Draco Hermione / where is that coming from? Like, how does it become a PDF that I can then put on my Kindle? Like, how does that happen?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Archive of Our Own, which is, I would say, like most fanfic writers probably post their works on Archive of Our Own, which we call AO3 is the little abbreviation of it. So even if they do post it on their own fandom website, a lot of folks maybe do cross-posting. That certainly was the case like years ago before AO3 kind of became so big. There's 14 million works on AO3 I just looked up, which so it's such a huge like monolith thing. So what you can do is when you post on AO3, you can really easily convert that like web page into a like printable PDF or something like that. Or
and they have EPUB too.
Yes, they have EPUB as well.
It's particularly handy on an airplane because like nothing worse than accidentally reloading the fanfic that you're trying to read on an airplane. And then you're like, I've got 4 more hours and I don't know what's going to happen.
Oh my gosh.
And also, for me, I spend too much time on traditional screens. So like being able to read something off of my computer screen or even off of my phone screen is very useful.
Yes.
Oh yeah. And also, and this is something that we found in our fandom, Our Flag Means Death, is that so many people are making podfics, which are essentially audiobooks of fan fiction. And it is incredible, the diversity of the podfic universe is incredible. There are people who put sound effects in and music and editing, and it is just unreal. It's so beautiful. So people do that. They post that on Archive of Our Own, and then they also post it sometimes on like SoundCloud. So you can listen to it as if you were listening to like an audiobook or a podcast as well.
It reminds me of like radio shows.
Absolutely.
Like old school radio shows, you know?
Yeah.
You know, I know a lot about the history of fan fiction because it was part of my PhD in media studies. Was we would always do like various weeks on the history. Like Henry Jenkins is someone who is very influential and like one of the first people to write very publicly about fan fiction. But like, how do you think about the history and how the history, like how canon, how all of these things, like how much it contributes to where we are now? I know that's a huge question.
Yeah.
But you can take that wherever you want.
I like what you said earlier about, I love this thing so much, I need more of it. I think that is like the history of fan fiction in a nutshell too. Is like, a lot of people will say, oh, it could have started with, you know, everything's fan fiction. Like people do fan fiction of Virgil and things like that. But I think in the modern age, which I don't know, like 20th century, 21st century, these books and movies and TV shows that we see, individual people love the thing so much. They then seek out other people to connect about it and then maybe create transformative works about it. I would say I always go to Star Trek because it was one of the first sort of like demonstrated or like remarkable fandoms where people really got together in person and also literally mailing things to each other. And created fan fiction and transformative works around this piece of media that they loved so much. And from there, it sort of evolved along with the technology. Fan fiction has like a parallel journey from snail mail to early internet to like the modern era. So you can kind of trace like the society and technology along with the history of fan fiction too. So I love that about it.
You know, we all kind of date the start of fanfic to Star Trek, but there were like clubs around Jane Austen's books and Sherlock Holmes that were like mailing each other stories and things like that in the past.
Yeah. And there's also a term that I learned from doing the podcast called drawer fic, which I have a hard time pronouncing the word drawer because I'm from Philadelphia.
Same.
So, but drawer, fic, where people would write fic and then just keep it to themselves. They would keep it in their drawer. And so I think that's an important part of the fanfic history and experience as well. You know, even though maybe no one else read it, the fact that people were always inspired to do that is great. And so we don't know about some of that, but like that's something that definitely happened. I know people who definitely wrote drawer fic.
Well, and it's something that you learn as a young child. Like, I don't know how many little short stories I've read by like some of the kids in my life about like Iron Man, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, you're like, oh, here's a character. And sometimes they learn of this character, not even through like source text, like they're too young to watch Iron Man, but they have Iron Man, the character, in their lives through some, you know, representation or a figurine or whatever it is, and you get to come up with a story about this person.
How
right?
fun.
So like it's amazing.
Yeah.
I also think the example of Star Trek is always like a useful one to think about because I think most people are familiar with some of like the base outlines of the text and also understand how there were a lot of constraints, right? So like you had a black character who didn't do anything, right? Or you had other female characters who also didn't do anything. And you had like this profoundly sexualized character who also like didn't really have, didn't have meaningful relationships that were satisfying, I think, to most women viewers. Like he wasn't like he was sexy, but in the wrong way. I don't know how else to describe Kirk.
Wait, Kirk? I don't know.
Oh, Emily's about to have an opinion.
I love James Kirk, y'all. And no one can do a slash shirt like him. Like, no one can do it.
Oh my God. It's so real. But not like, I don't know. Like the whole... The prevalence of fic that places him with Spock always communicates to me like, oh, we want these sensitive men to like be sensitive with one another and then also maybe have sex with one another.
As a treat.
Yeah, as a treat.
Well, the thing is with that is like for a lot of assigned female at birth folks and queer folks, you know, you don't really see media depictions that are that capture the types of relationship you want or that you want to be part of. And so it's just being able to take these characters, which you see all the time, and say, man, I wish they could express themselves this way because that's how I feel. And so I think you're totally right. Like the character, it's not that he's bad. It's just that there are things about it that are not, they're just not vibing with the way that we want to be or want to see ourselves. And it's an idealized like version of reality, really.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so are we ready for the questions?
Oh my gosh, we're so excited about the questions.
We are so ready.
Okay, we are excited for this first question. Let's hear from Tina.
I would like to see fanfic explored as a distinct genre of romance writing, with its own long, unique, and ever-evolving history and culture. A potential subtopic for discussion could be its strong culture of queerness, how many people writing it are queer women, the historic prominence of slash, and how and why it has been gradually mainstreamed. It's no longer so taboo, especially in a room of Gen Z folks, to admit you read it. But whatever you and your co-host come up with, I will avidly listen to. I have been reading fanfic since I was 13, and I'm now 40. I'm sure I'm far from your only listener with this kind of long personal history with the genre who would be thrilled at an episode on this topic.
What did this comment/question make you think about?
Well, the amazing thing that I immediately thought of is that Archive of Our Own does a demographic survey of the people who write fic and submit it to them. And the 2024 survey, obviously this is self-reported.
Yeah.
You know, but 81.4% of people identified as LGBTQ plus in some form, which is a huge number.
Yes.
And I think that it is such an important part of fanfic that often gets pushed to the side in a lot of mainstream discourse about it, which is like, oh, it's just these like horny straight women, they're just writing about stuff. But that's really not the story of fanfic to me. And I think obviously to many of the people who are writing on AO3, at least for me, it was a gateway for me to understand my own queerness and to like explore aspects of that before I was ready to do it in real life. And also the community building aspect of it, it has put me in touch with a lot more queer people because we have a similar shared interest. Now, admittedly, being in the Our Flag Means Death fandom, which is explicitly a queer show, is a little bit different than a lot of fanfic, which is queering shows or other media, which is explicitly not queer. And that has honestly been a pretty refreshing experience for a lot of us, I think.
Oh, I bet.
Instead of like looking for queerness and trying to fit it in there, it's been really exciting to be able to write about canon queer characters, and to also have like the support of the showrunner and the actors.
Not only the support, the participation,
the excitedness of it. Yeah, the show creator wrote some fanfic for the show on Blue Sky over Christmas
for us to read.
Which is a pretty unique experience in fandom, I think.
Yeah.
But so yeah, that's where that goes for me, is how important fanfic is to people who are queer, who are interested in this as a playground to explore things. And also for people who are not queer, but maybe are thinking about their straight sexuality and wondering about it. It's still a great place to explore things that maybe you would not do in real life, but you want to know about it. You want to write about it and think about it.
Yeah. Emily, do you have anything that makes you think of?
I would say, yeah, I'm looking at the question too, like in terms of like the genre of romance writing, right? So I think one of the things that V and I have talked about a lot, just, you know, ourselves, is like, obviously people can write romance and publish it. And there's that traditional publishing aspect of it where, you know, you go through channels to get your book edited and published and put it out there in the market. And then the fan fiction side of it is this really primarily gift culture, sort of and like non-capitalist and also very participatory avenue for writing. And it's just a really unique way to engage with writing. And you're also getting like immediate feedback from readers, which is really kind of different than traditional publishing as well, which I think, to V's point, helps create that community of people who share interests and want to explore things and also just have fun together too. Like that's part of it. It's like, you know, you don't have, doesn't have to be super serious, but it can be serious. And like V was saying too, like I definitely, as a kid, was reading fan fiction because I was like, I don't know. I don't see myself in these mainstream stories. I'm confused about where I fit into this. How do I, you know, can I explore this? And fan fiction was a way to help me like process that, really. And so I think people do that a lot and comment on fics and engage with each other that way, which is, I think, a little different than how traditional like published genres work in some ways.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to pick up here. The first is that I always think back on my time in my growing up in my small town in Idaho about how there just weren't very many like representations of ways to be in the world that were available to me. Not only just in like the people I knew in real life, but also even just in like the access I had to movies. Like I just had we didn't even have a Blockbuster until I was in high school. Like there, you know, limited television. Like I accessed the internet through AOL. And when I think about like the version of fanfic that I knew how to access, I knew how to get to like some BBSs, but like a lot of it was role playing in AOL.
Oh yeah,
chat rooms, right?
Yeah, 2 a.m. was lit. We were up and we. Oh my gosh, it was so good.
Yeah. But then also just the idea, I think, for a lot of us in our 30s who have like job jobs and maybe have tried to figure out like, okay, what do I do for me? Like, what is my hobby? And I don't mean to like use that word in a demeaning way. Like, what is the thing I do without monetizing it that I do because I love it?
Yeah.
And I think that it can be a real outlet in those terms where there isn't this push to always be like, okay, well, if I'm good at it, then I have to figure out how to like sell this book. Right.
Ugh. Yeah, that's a big tension though that I felt like this is like a tangent, but I would always often talk to my parents and be like, oh, I just published this I do tell my parents I write fan fiction, which I know not everyone does, but they're like,
I don't.
Oh, well, that's great. They would say, oh, well, that's great. When are you going to publish when are you going to really publish something? And I'm like, right. I am. Like, you know, it doesn't have to, we don't always have to produce like and achieve what society thinks that's the end goal. I will say though, of course, there's nothing wrong with like getting published and like having your book out there in traditional publishing. Of course, like that's great. But I think for fan fiction, it's not only about kind of making the work and putting it out there. It's about that community aspect and also it takes, again, some of that pressure off, which you don't need any more pressure in these times. So
this is our fun hobby that we do for fun.
Yeah.
I
say that all the time when people are stressed about their fic.
People say this all the time actually in my Dahlia group, my Dahlia Facebook group, because it's like can get very intense and people like hunting for special varietals. They're like, you guys, these are fancy potatoes. Like this is our fun hobby that we do for fun.
Let's touch grass, aka touch potatoes.
Yes. Exactly. Sometimes it's type 2 fun, but we're having fun.
Yes. This episode of Culture Study is brought to you by Graza. It's actually been my favorite olive oil for a little while, like several years. It's fresh. It's never blended. It comes from a single type of olive, the Picual, straight out of Jaén, Spain, where over half the world's olive oil is produced. My favorite thing is the squeeze bottle. Like, this is the innovation to end all innovations. Who thought, like, oh, we have this giant lug of olive oil, and every time you use it, it goes, like, dribbling all down the side. The squeeze bottle is so pleasurable to use. You know exactly how much you're going to... There's no, like, glug, glug, glug as it, like, pours out, and you're like, oh, no. And they have 3 types. So there's this frizzle type, which is new, and I use it to do my tofu now, and it is perfect. It's at a higher 490-degree smoke point, so it's great for frying, crisping, anything that you would do in a wok. There's the sizzle, which is for everyday cooking, like roasting, marinating, sautéing. It's what I brown my vegetables in, like my Brussels sprouts, that sort of thing. And then there's the drizzle, which is a bold, punchy finishing oil that you can put on salads. You can dip your bread in it. They suggest topping your ice cream with it. I don't know, yesterday I put some like into the water that was cooking my grains for the recipe I was making for the Culture Study Cookbook Club. It worked well. So right now, you can get 10% off your first order on Graza's site. And I personally suggest grabbing the trio. That's all 3 squeezy bottles, the sizzle, the frizzle, and the drizzle, so you're set for every style of cooking. So head to graza.co and use culture to get 10% off the trio, which includes the sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle, and get cooking on your next chef-quality meal. Our next question is from Devra, and it's going to help us situate fan fiction a little bit in the broader landscape of reading and publishing.
I've been reading fanfic since the mid-90s on web rings and fan-hosted archives. I'm obsessed with the way it's going mainstream, especially the ways that we're seeing fan fiction and traditionally published romance in particular iterate off of each other. I'd love to hear you talk about that. How is capital R romance changing because of fanfic? How is romance in turn feeding back into fan fiction tropes? Where is the fanfic singularity? And/or have we already hit it?
I chose this question. I mean, it's a great question in so many ways,
Yeah.
but also fanfic singularity was just, I
incredible.
couldn't resist.
10 no
incredible. So where do you want to go with this?
So we have to confess that when we got this question, both of us said we don't read romance. And so I went to a Discord that I'm in, which is a fandom Discord, and asked the people there who do read romance what they thought. So I'm going to represent their ideas, which was basically that romance is not the genre that is being the most influenced by fanfic. It's sci-fi fantasy.
Oh, interesting.
And there are a ton of authors right now who have straight up said, I also publish fanfic. So like Everina Maxwell, Freya Marsky, Foz Meadows. Another great example is Tamsin Moore, who wrote the Gideon the Ninth series. There's like obvious references to fanfic in that series, which is kind of like a fantasy sci-fi hybrid. That being said, in the last few years, there have been several mainstream romance novels which are based on Reylo fics. So Reylo is Rey/Kylo Ren from the Star Wars sequels. The 2 biggest romance books based on those are The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood and The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzon. And both of those were originally fics that were then traditionally published. So that particular pairing seems to be popular. And then similarly, the Dramione pairing. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I've only ever read it, but it's like Draco slash Hermione.
That pronunciation though,
Yes.
Dramione.
Dramione.
It's
That's
not
like
like
how you say it
Dramium,
sexy.
like you know, the anti-nausea drug.
Yeah. The Dramamine fanfic is very popular.
Dramamine.
But both of those ships I would classify as being like kind of like a Heathcliff type, like dark tortured guy, and then more of like a nerdy but powerful like woman who can be relatable to the reader.
Right. Melody, you've read a bunch of Dramamine.
I've read one.
A bunch. I heard it was so many.
Melody.
You're an expert.
It was like 800 pages.
Yeah,
if that's
so-
what you meant.
Oh, was it the famous one?
It was manacled.
Yep,
Yeah.
there we go.
And Melody is a huge romance reader. What did you notice, if anything, about like how it was borrowing any tropes that you would recognize from romance?
Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I didn't prepare.
You can think about it for a second while I note quickly that something that I'm just noticing, thinking about like tags and how fics are sorted is what I've noticed has become much more prominent within romances, which is like the very clear like sorting by tropes.
Yeah, signaling
like,
what it is.
Yes, very like being like, here is how this opens, here's how this opens. Like you can really refine what you're looking for and sort it in a way that I don't think was always possible. But Melody, back to you.
Okay, I'm gonna actually twist the question just a little bit. In that I follow a lot of bookstagrammers and TikTokers who cover romance, and all of them are talking about, I pronounce it Hermione.
Oh, that makes way more sense than what I just said.
Hermione. They're like, and especially like, I read Manacled maybe like 2 years ago, but right now, like all of these creators are like, I'm only reading Hermione right now.
Wow.
And so I think there's this element of like, it's a comfortable universe. It's like nostalgic for childhood, but it's inherently an enemies to lovers type trope. And with that comes with the comfort of like something you thought was evil is no longer evil. But I don't think these creators like broadly read fan fiction. So there is like something where it's like, oh yeah, I read like Allie Hazelwood, I read Megan Quinn or whoever, and I'm also reading specifically Hermione fan fiction.
It's escape containment.
I think it's also like a strong element of like, I can fix him. You know, that's an everlasting trope.
Yes.
I think 100%. Romance and fanfic have like a symbiotic relationship in a way, because when I think about fan fiction tropes, and so when we tropes is kind of a fanficky word,
like TV tropes.
So TV tropes. So enemies to lovers, idiots to lovers, my favorite categories that you would place mostly relationships in. And I think a lot of romance novels use those tropes, and a lot of people, a lot of those tropes are sort of like universally exciting to people. And so we borrow them from romance, which isn't to say that we read romance necessarily, but certainly like the story arcs of a lot of romance novels will follow similar arcs as fan fiction does. And I think it's because those tropes are kind of universal in a way. They like relate across media. Right. And that makes sense to me, that they would then like this, like, I wish I can fix him type of thing is so real.
Exactly.
The other thing I was just thinking of is that the other thing that I've seen pop up is ACOTAR fan fiction. Yeah. And so I think it very much goes to what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode of like, there is this world that I can't stop thinking about and I just want more out of it.
Yeah. I think one final point I want to add on that is that it's interesting to me that romance is largely going with these straight ships, whereas sci-fi fantasy is going with the queer ships. And that's just an interesting observation that I have to say. I don't have further thought on it, but I wanted to note it.
Yeah. Well, one thing about the ACOTAR fanfic, at least as far as I know, Melody, is that a lot of it actually is queer because there is no queerness in the books, explicit queerness. And there's also like, it's very monogamous. Like there's a place in one of the books where it's very clear that two of the guys should have sex with one of the girls, like that they should have a threesome.
Oh, yeah.
And and supposedly there's like lost pages and those lost pages have been reimagined. But like, and that.
Yeah, ones I've read are all like filthy, like 5 people in a hot tub.
Nice.
kind of thing. So, yeah.
Okay, next question is somewhat related and also I think will help us get into the conversation about public perception. This one comes from Rayanne.
As someone who started in the fanfic world and only recently got into romance, fanfiction feels like it gets more flack. Is this the case? And if so, why? I'm still an avid fanfic reader, but unless you're in online communities about fanfics, everyone speaks really coded about it in real life. Was this true of romance before, but now that it's having a comeback, it's more normalized? Do you anticipate a time where you could simply tell people that you like to read fanfic and not have to explain it or defend it?
The question of all questions.
Truly.
Oh man, this is a good question though. I mean, so I think both romance and fanfiction have been stigmatized out in the world because, in my opinion, it's mostly because it's AFAB and queer folks who are gravitating towards these things, who want to read romance and who want to read and write fan fiction. And the AFAB and queer experience in our society isn't super valued and is often denigrated. And so I think just inherently, the fact that ladies, like my mom literally reads romance, I see like the stacks on her dresser, and I can just picture certain people in society saying, "Oh, these ladies in their romance," like, "Oh my goodness," and it's almost like goes back to Jane Austen. Like now we think of Jane Austen books as these, great works of literature, which they are, but they, I think, probably had a similar thing where they're about romantic relationships, and they're not about, some dude actualizing himself on the sea. So how, it's not important. So
Yes.
I think they've always been sort of stigmatized in that way. And I think fan fiction has had this further flackification because it is not traditional publishing, and so people have this sort of opinion like there's an amateur quality to fan fiction, and
Right.
it's a hobby. You're not really right. And my parents, like I've said before, my own parents were like, well, when are you going to really publish something? I'm like, I think there's that perception that fan fiction is sort of less than original fiction writing or traditional writing.
Illegitimate, right? Like
Yes.
even the fact that it's not like canon, like it's illegitimate in that capacity, but then it's also not legitimized through traditional publishing outlets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I feel like it comes from, is that double whammy of misogyny, homophobia,
Yep.
and capitalism.
Yes.
The trifecta of oppression that we have today. So, but I think we, nowadays, I personally tell everyone I write fan fiction, but I think it depends on who you are, what community you're in, your comfort level with the people around you, because I definitely know people in my fandom and elsewhere who wouldn't feel comfortable telling people they write fan fiction for very valid reasons, because it's something that I think does inherently open up a question like, well, wait, are you queer, or what are you doing? Like, how do you think? So if you're not in a safe environment where you feel like you can talk about that, it does feel pretty scary to talk about it. But I personally am, everybody knows I write fan fiction, and I'm happy to talk about it to anyone who asks. So
Yeah. V, what do you think?
I agree with all of what Emily said about like why it's stigmatized and why it's kind of considered to be an amateur thing. It used to strike me when I was a teenager as deeply unfair that I read so much fanfic that was clearly by AFAB authors about Star Wars, and yet almost all of the Star Wars novels, all but I think one of the original extended, what's it called now? The EU novels, which are now not canon anymore, they were written by men, and that was just such a stark contrast to me. Personally, I do not share my real name or tell people in my public life that I write fanfic. It's not really a big deal to me, but like Emily was saying, sometimes you just don't want people to make those assumptions about you. I want to have a space to experiment that the people I manage at work, for example, don't know about. You know?
Right.
So,
yes. No, that totally makes sense. And I think like there are a lot of the assumptions that people make are based on like a paragraph that they read somewhere sometime, right? Like not firsthand experiences at all.
Mm-hmm.
When people say like, oh, the writing is bad, I'm like, have you read most nonfiction works? Like just generally, like there is very little editing that goes on in most of the quote unquote legitimate publishing world. Like I think that the writing is significantly better in so many cases.
Yeah.
Or even like the idea that every single fic is like absolute, like it's just all porn, right?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Which I think is very prevalent. And yeah, there's some hot, sexy stuff, but it's not every single fic
that's
by
certainly
any
not all
means.
of it. Yeah.
Well, and even if it is, I think like in America, there's this kind of, and this is just my experience, there's this kind of purity thing where we're like, well, literature mustn't talk about the naughty bits.
Totally.
Like, and it's like,
Right.
I think human sexuality is really cool and interesting and like really fun. And I think it's awesome to be able to explore that, because we don't really get a lot of avenues in our society, especially as, I identify as a woman, I'm AFAB, and I wasn't encouraged to talk about sexuality as in growing up. And so the fact that we can access that in fan fiction, which again, I'm not to say that you can't talk about it in traditional publishing, but there's certainly a lot of steps and hoops to jump through in order to kind of have those discussions that maybe don't really exist in fan fiction, because you can literally write and push post immediately,
Yeah. And think about how much literary fiction is like men writing these sex scenes about women that are, and those are considered like, that's the height of literary fiction. I've read some bad ones.
Yes, absolutely.
Whereas it's like considered illegitimate for women to write these things and to read these things. But it's like high literature if a man is writing it. So
yeah.
That's changing somewhat. But I agree with Emily that there is definitely this feeling that you can't have like real character development or like real plot movement through sex, which I think all of us who are alive understand that a lot of character development and plot development occurs because of that for ourselves. So it feels like these books are just, or whatever media is just missing this chunk of the human experience because of some like weird morality rules.
Yeah. Okay, this next question is kind of along these lines, and it comes from Peel, and I wanted to include it because of my history as an academic. So here we go.
This is more of a comment, I suppose. I feel like when academics talk about fan fiction, it is quite alienating and judgy in many cases. Usually there's no one involved who's ever been in fandom, or if they have since stopped writing or participating and tend to be quite ashamed about it. Why do you think that people approach this specific topic this way? Is it because the reputation is that this is for teenage girls? For the record, many of the people I write with are adults who've been doing this for years or even decades.
All right, so we gestured to this in the beginning that like AO3 has an academic journal.
Yeah.
And I will just say that my experience when I was back in the academy, there was an emerging field called ACA fandom.
Ooh.
ACA fandom, which is a horrible moniker.
I don't know if I love
kind
it.
of like Drania.
It sounds like an insurance company or something. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that was trying to suggest that there is real power in being a practitioner of the thing that you study, and to collapse some of the understanding that like whatever you are analyzing, that you have to have this significant distance from it in some way. So what is your experience with this?
Well, I actually had one answer until you said that last bit about collapsing the experience. My background is that I have a higher degree in anthropology, and of course, a long-standing debate in anthropology is, are you actually an observer of these subjects?
Right.
Or are you not? And I think we're all coming down hard on the side of, you are not just an observer. There is no such thing as an objective observer. Sorry to the Victorians. There is not. But I was a little surprised to hear that question, because fan studies is actually like a pretty active and flourishing field in academia.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm sort of wondering like what type of academia that person was thinking of. Mm-hmm. Through the R-Flag fandom, I have met several people who are academics in fan studies who like write about that fandom and participate in the fandom. And it's kind of interesting to hear them talk about like, how do I separate out my persona that I'm like teaching my students or presenting at a conference or publishing a paper, and then also this persona where I'm like screaming about this behind the scenes video or something.
Yeah.
So maybe there are some corners of academia that are very dismissive of it. I'm sure we all have a picture in our head right now of what that person looks like. But in general, I think that there is a flourishing field of academia full of fans who are also studying what it's like to be a fan.
I would say that mirrors my experience in terms of the people who are in fan studies are not talking shit about it, right? No. It's people who are in the other corners of media who are like still studying somehow like mid-century French cinema, who are talking shit, right? Yeah. Because they don't think of that corner of the discipline as legitimate. I would also say that some of these people are probably English PhDs. I know I love a lot of English PhDs, but there's some shittiness on the part of people who think that media studies do not belong under the umbrella of English as a discipline. So,
I think so. I went to college for writing and publishing and literature, and I don't think fan fiction was very welcome in that major at my college, because people love to put things into silos and boxes.
Yeah.
And so fan fiction doesn't fit into the box of traditional writing because it doesn't follow the same steps and all these, this, that, and the other thing. And so I don't know if it was hostile necessarily, but certainly I didn't, I couldn't talk about my fan fiction writing in my writing workshops. I had to talk about original work because that's the real writing. So I think the English PhD piece, I don't think, every English PhD, but certainly people who are really used to one way of producing literature and writing, and that's kind of the way.
Yep.
You know, it's a conflict because fan fiction doesn't really ascribe to a lot of those rules, and I think that's just inherently what it really is. But I think people who study media really get it, because fan fiction is like, writing fan fiction is like the ultimate sign that you are like so excited about media. And like, so that's a great person to look at when you're talking about media and like thinking about media studies.
Yeah. And who are like very invested in thinking and talking about that thing too. Like, I mean, part of this is just also a divide between people who are only interested in the creation of the thing and the thing as itself, right?
Yes.
Like as a discrete item.
Yes.
And then people who are very interested in how people make meaning out of that thing.
Yes.
Right? So broadly understood as like reception studies. And for me, that's always been more interesting. The production part is interesting in terms of like a process piece, but then like the various ways that the thing takes on a life of its own once it goes out into the world, like that's endless, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so many iterations.
Yeah.
And I think there's also like, I don't know who decides this, but somehow culture and society decides what is like high art and what's just for everybody else and everyone's having fun. And like those things that everyone's just having fun and watching are somehow not really worthy of this, like, this, you know, studying and things like that. And it's like, no, we can talk about the Marvel universe. Like, that's fine. You know, it's all the
driving
human
our culture.
It's driving culture. It's human experiences. But I think for some reason, like, I don't know, you could see like The Sopranos at one point probably wasn't. And now all of a sudden with enough years, it's like crossed the threshold into this like high, like thing that people are writing, you know, dissertations about and stuff. I think there's this weird like separation between what folks consider to be worthy of study and not, you know?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, like novels were originally just silly things that women read.
Scribbling women, right?
Yeah, scribbling women.
And I think that like the opinion even that like popular culture shouldn't be studied is one that is retiring and or dead.
Yay.
But there are still some people who hold on to that view. Today's episode is sponsored by Ollie. My dogs are so obsessed. When I open the fridge at any point after 6:30 p.m., they start just like they come over and they sit attentively. They love this food so much. It is ridiculous. Like, I fear the day that I run out. Like, they're going to go on hunger strike. It's so incredibly good. Afterwards, Bev takes her bowl and brings it over to like her little dog cushion and just like lovingly like wishes that she could extract a tiny bit more flavor. Ollie is clean, fresh nutrition. It comes in 5 different flavors. Even for the pickiest eaters, there's something in there that they're going to love. My dogs like every single flavor that has been put in front of them. And it's made in U.S. kitchens from the highest quality human-grade ingredients. There's no fillers, there's no preservatives, just real food. And this is evidenced by the fact that their poops are significantly smaller, which means there is no bulking agent going on. So this is how it works. You go onto the site and you introduce them to your pup. So you fill out this little quiz. It's like 30 seconds, and they create a customized meal plan based on your dog's weight, activity level, other health info. And then you get a welcome kit. So the first time you order, they send out this first box, and it has 2 weeks worth of meals, a free storage container, which is actually very svelte and like not ugly, and a guide of how to gradually switch them over to their new diet. Ollie is also the only fresh dog food that comes with unlimited routine health screenings, so you can get your pup on track to live their healthiest and happiest life. Dogs deserve the best, and that means fresh, healthy food. Head to ollie.com/culture. Tell them all about your dog, and then use Culture to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer this happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's ollie.com/culture and enter code CULTURE to get 60% off your first box. Our next question, I'm so excited to think about this one because it's an overlap of my interests in like celebrity studies and all of this. So let's hear from Beth.
What are your thoughts on romance novels that are based on celebrity fan fiction? I explained to my husband that there are many, many Adam Driver romance novels out there, and he was flabbergasted. Why do you think this has happened? How do you think it feels for the celebrities that are used as characters? And should we care about how they feel about it?
Such a good question.
The thing that I should mention first is that the idea of you is supposedly, there's a lot of controversy about this, is supposedly Harry Styles and like Olivia Wilde fanfic. I love
not Olivia Wilde, just Harry Styles and a normie.
Oh, and Mary Sue.
Self-insert.
Self-insert.
Yeah, but also like older, like Olivia Wilde. Like I think that there's like some Olivia Wilde similarities going on here. But yes, you're right. No, you're right, Melody. I love that that Beth said at the end, should we care about that?
Yeah.
Should
and
we?
It's also going to bring up one of my favorite apocryphal George Clooney stories, because I cannot find it anywhere, but I remember it vividly, which was like some interviewer asking if he cared about celebrity gossip that he was gay. And he was like, why wouldn't I want people to believe that if it made them happy?
That's
right?
great.
George.
I know, right?
Gosh.
like why? I don't care.
Yeah.
Like if that gives someone pleasure to like live that reality in their lives, it's not offensive to me.
Yeah.
But that I've always thought of as like the way that a celebrity should think about any of the ways that people imagine their lives or their characters' lives or anything like that. But what do you think?
Yeah. So the question is kind of is like, oh, romance novels based on fan fiction about, but so it's really like, I think you can identify in certain romance novels, oh, this probably is about the celebrity. But in fan fiction, there is a very real thing called real person fan fiction.
Yeah.
And it is on Archive of Our Own. You can go on there and you can look up fan fiction about actual real celebrities. And actually, there is a huge movement in bandom, which is fandom about bands. A lot of K-pop bands and other things where they write fan fiction about this, musicians and singers in the band. And it's something that is a little, it's people feel differently about it depending on who you ask in fandom. But I think what we often see is that celebrities aren't really real people in terms of, I know you and I talk to you on the, in our house and I talk to you about your interests. They're sort of these archetypes and characters that are part of our media landscape. And they're not necessarily three-dimensional in many ways, unless you're really, you know this person and you're really into that person and know everything about them. But it's hard to know other people in that way, period. And celebrities are so far removed from many of us that they do feel like, I don't know. I don't want to say superheroes because that's like giving them too much. But like,
no, they're images.
Like fictional characters.
They are images, right? Like,
images,
and there's a distance between like who the celebrity is as a person who like goes to the bathroom and like lives a life, right? Like, and then there's like their image, which is a very carefully curated understanding of who they are.
Yes.
And I think that what people are making these fictions about, they are based on that image. They're not based on like, this is not, you don't write a fanfic about like, oh, I went to high school with, I don't know, Harry Styles, and thus I know him, and here is my story that I'm writing about him, right? And I always think, too, about the fan magazines used to have so many different stories that were always written by press agents and said to be authored by the star itself. So it would be like Marilyn Monroe writing a story about like what kind of wife she was. And really, those are like, it's like the press agent writing a fanfic about the image of Marilyn Monroe because it was based on what they wanted the public to understand her to be, right? Yeah. It was never actually Marilyn Monroe writing any of those words or saying any of those things. So people are always building like imaginary understandings of who these people are. It's just their faces and the way that they behave in their movies and all of that sort of thing, like that becomes the source material.
Yeah, and there's always a performance aspect of being a celebrity, especially if it's an actor or a musician. You're putting yourself out there. I'm thinking of Harry Styles and the way Harry Styles, like by way of David Bowie, who David Bowie literally created characters that he portrayed, and he dressed up in certain ways to align with that. And so that is like a heightened version of what actually happens all the time, where celebrities are these kind of like distinct characters sometimes. Now, that said, it's totally fine if people are like, I'm not really comfortable with real person fan fiction. It's not my thing. Totally fine. But I definitely have tried to kind of think of it that way, as people just playing around with these characters that they see on their TV screens and on their phones constantly. Now, the thing that gets tricky is when you confront celebrities and say, look at this thing somebody wrote about you. That is a big no-no. And in fandom, one of the things that we really try to do is make sure that it's like, because when you're confronting people with that kind of thing, it puts the celebrity on the spot and also kind of denigrates like the fan, and just that's something that I think is clear for me anyway, of like a kind of a hard line. But I think people just are seeing celebrities all the time and they're fascinated by them, and they want to like kind of play around and see what would happen if they went to the coffee shop and met a cute boy, you know?
Yeah.
So,
totally.
And the cute boy was Harry Styles.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that last point about the ethics, essentially, of like, you know, I've seen it happen in like junkets where they're like, let me read this segment of this steamy fic to you. And it's condescending. I think it's exploitative of both the celebrity and trying to get their reaction, and of the writer. And I think that it's one of those things that people just don't think that much about before they do it. And if you did think about it for longer than 5 minutes, then you might have a different reaction to it. I'm super excited for this one because I know you guys have done specific episodes on this. So this is about a specific corner of fan fiction. It comes from Scout.
I'm really interested in delving deeper into the genre of AU, alternate universe fanfic. I think that AU lends itself better to some series than others. So, for example, I read a lot of Interview with the Vampire fanfic, but I specifically avoid AU fanfics that are too far removed from the original setting for that series, because I find the concept of them being vampires directly impacts how they move about the world and informs the character's worldview, etc. So I find without that key element, the characters are just not as interesting to me. I don't feel as much like I'm reading a story about these characters I know and love. Whereas I love reading AU fic for a series like Bridgerton. Can your guests speak a little bit to why they think the AU phenomenon is so common in fan fiction and why it works for some things but not for others?
Okay, so can one of you explain just briefly what AU fanfic is?
Yeah, AU stands for alternate universe. So to take a very simple example I think everyone will know, you want to read or write some Harry Potter fan fiction, and you decide in this universe they're not wizards. There's no magic. And so that is the alternate universe that these characters are now existing in. We did an entire hour-long episode about this on our show, which, by the way, is called Mind the Tags. That episode is called The Multiverse of Fanfic. But that's a really fun question. I am not very familiar with Interview with the Vampire. I mean, I know the basics of it, but I can see how taking them out of the vampire setting would fundamentally very much alter those characters.
Yeah.
Whereas for Harry Potter fanfic, I think a lot of people, the magic is pretty incidental to what they're interested in about those characters. And so part of it is, to me, I think if you have a creator who is clearly interested in like world building or in the implications of the setting that they've put these characters in, or if the characters don't really make sense in a modern setting, or not modern, but in an alternate setting, then in that case, it might not work. Like, my understanding is that in an Interview with the Vampire, they do a lot of like killing each other and having really toxic relationships. So that seems like that would be tougher to translate into like they work at a coffee shop together kind of story.
I like that you point out that like some people, like, they have more interest or pleasure in something like world building. So part of it is almost like it's an experiment to see, okay, what happens when I do that. Right? Yeah.
And like Star Wars, I think, is a good example of that, where the Star Wars universe is like so vast. There's so many places to tell stories there that honestly, you could write a story set in the Star Wars universe where they work in a coffee shop and they just serve like blue milk lattes or whatever. But when you get to Interview with the Vampire or similar fics like that, or thinking of like Game of Thrones, a lot of those characters also act in ways that would not be acceptable if they worked in a coffee shop. So taking them out of that setting might be difficult to maintain the integrity of the characterization. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Emily?
Yeah, I think it's the translatability of the characters because in Interview with the Vampire, for example, one of the things about Louis is that how does he deal with being a vampire? Like that's one of the central questions of his character and the interesting thing. So that I think is like one of the driving parts of the character. So I would understand if someone's like, yeah, I'm interested in that versus maybe an alternate reality where he's, you know, hanging out and I don't know, working in a movie theater. But I think for some characters, it's more about learning about themselves, building relationships with other people, their identity. And that can be in any universe. You can plop them into truly anywhere. Famously, in our fandom, we have, you know, our pirates are all over the place. They're aliens. They're on spaceships. They're doing, you know, they're world-class musicians. They're rock stars. And it's all the same story and the same characters of, you know, discovering things about themselves and making connections. And as long as you feel like the character is recognizable in whatever universe they're in, that's kind of what sort of builds it for people. But I totally think that there are some media properties that lend themselves to that and some that are more very, very place-based and based in that universe.
Yeah.
Okay, so our last question is for all of you who are listening who are like, I've got to get into this, or I used to be into this and I want to get back into it. This one comes from Casey.
As a tween and young teen, I was a voracious consumer of Harry Potter fanfic during the heyday of the early 2000s internet. And then I just sort of stopped seeking it out. My question is, if I want to get back into it, where are we going these days to find the good stuff? By which I mean quality writing and delightfully insane but somehow plausible plotlines. I think a lot of my big feelings about seeking out sources of fanfic again are wrapped up in my general unease about the way that being online feels today, and a nostalgia/yearning for the way that surfing and reading online used to feel before social media. Like the internet, TM, was this big, amazing world full of wonders to discover. And so, second question, do you think that reading fanfic again can help me and other former AOL chat room kids time machine back to the better feelings that we had about being on the internet?
I love the end of that question. Perfect. 10-10.
What advice do you have?
As a person in their mid-30s, you're not aged out. You are not too old for fan fiction. It is, the playground is vast. And actually, there are more, back in the day, it was very siloed, like V was saying, like you were on an individual websites where you could find fic about this particular thing. Now it's wide open, which kind of seems like scary in a way. But Archive of Our Own, or AO3, is like, I would say, the biggest repository and definitely the most notable place where fan fiction is. And you can filter your journey. You can really get any fic that you specifically want about these characters and this trope. You can really filter it down to exactly what you want. And so even though it's really big, there's ways to make it so that it's catered to what you want as well.
I want to throw in that on Archive of Our Own, if you are overwhelmed for choice, you can also sort by how many hits this fanfic has received to see how popular it is. Or there's also something called kudos, which is how many people have said, I liked this. And so you can sort by either of those. So if you're looking to start out, you're like, hey, I love Mulder and Scully. You can search for, I want to look at X-Files fandom that specifically has the pairing Mulder and Scully. And I want to see the top kudos. So the most liked fanfics in this genre.
Yeah. There's tons of ways to parse it. And again, it's like, it can be a little overwhelming, but so much of it is in one place, which is really nice. Because before you'd have to go running around looking for it. I will say that AO3, or Archive of Our Own, is a project of the Organization for Transformative Works. So OTW is what kind of runs AO3. They also run other things. And then there's other sites as well. So V mentioned fanfiction.net, which is still up and running. God bless. And then there's also Wattpad, which I've never really explored, but a lot of people put fanfiction on Wattpad now. I would say there's also original fiction, a lot of original fiction on Wattpad and other things. So it might be like a little bit more challenging to find. I'm not totally sure. And then in terms of like the social media, internet of it all, I feel like fandom has lived on Tumblr for a long time, certainly since LiveJournal kind of went by the wayside. And for a while, I thought Tumblr was dead, but she is alive, y'all. She is out here thriving, okay? So get ye to the Tumblr, it's out here. And it's still very much a fandom like fandom friendly place where you can find a lot of things, I think. And
yeah,
a lot of us in fandom now have our own Discord servers, and that's where we are convening and talking about fan fiction and talking about other things. And so you can kind of poke around and find out if fandoms that you're interested in might have like a little Discord server to join.
Yeah, and depending on your fandom, it might also have a big presence on TikTok or Instagram. Our fandom has a really big presence on Blue Sky now. So it might be a little dependent on what your fandom is, but I think that Tumblr and AO3 are great places to start.
Does AO3, anytime I hear about like the conglomeration, for lack of a better word, of a lot of individual contributors into one space, like it always just makes me very wary, right? Like in terms of like one person just having all the control, like, or not one person, but one organization. And how do you think AO3 attempts to try to avoid that feeling?
Oh, this is so tough. Yeah. So OTW is a nonprofit, but it's pretty much all volunteers.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, there's a ton of people involved. So that kind of immediately takes away like, oh, it's just this one person kind of thing.
Right.
Although, of course, there's like people leading it and stuff. But one of the things that AO3, I think, struggles with is that they really try not to censor. They don't come in here and say, well, this fic is appropriate and this isn't and this is not. And that has been challenging because there have been folks who say, hey, there's some problematic stuff up here. There's some stuff that's harmful. And AOTW, I think, always has had the position like, we're not going to police what's going on up here. The users, in a way, are kind of doing that. And like you can report things and certainly. So I think they've tried to have a like distanced approach to trying to tell people what to do and things like that. But it's definitely led to some concerns. I know in 2020, for example, there was a lot of concerns raised about how AO3 doesn't have a lot of filters for racist material and content, and that there's some things out there that maybe could be really problematic and harmful. And I think OTW has always been very slow moving purposefully because they don't want to come across as we're going to gatekeep fan fiction now. It's supposed to be a very open archive of fan fiction, and its main purpose is as an archive, not as like a curated space. If that makes sense?
Right. So it's an archive, not a platform, which it leads to some of the difficulties. That totally makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like they face a lot of the same censorship questions that every social media network, every place that has multiple contributors are facing and continue to struggle with. And we should mention the protest that happened in 2024 that was end racism in the OTW.
End racism in the OTW. Fans put it together and just talking about some of the really valid concerns that were brought up about how to make AO3 safe for folks, but also not censor folks, and so to how to thread that line.
Because it's self-tagging. People could write really horrible things and not tag them, and that's a problem. So,
but I think one of my ending questions I want to say is like, does it feel like it's still a good place on the internet for you, especially within the fandoms where you choose to hang out?
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
AO3 is open constantly on my computer. I see that little logo.
Tabs.
I see that little logo and I'm like, I'm home. It's like that little logo. It's just like calling to me, like she's my little friend. I love it. But it's because I think I know how to navigate it and filter and make sure that I'm protecting myself. And if I feel like I am getting uncomfortable, if I feel like there's a tag and I'm like, ooh, I don't know, this is going to make, if this is going to make me feel weird, then I just don't read it and I can move on.
Yeah.
But it always feels very safe for me.
Yeah.
I think it has a really strong community around it. When I came into the fandom I'm in now, I didn't really understand how to tag fics. And so I would post something and not tag it, or tag it like very poorly. And people were really nice about it, but were like, hey, can you just put a tag that says like this thing on here so people know? And I was like, oh, thanks. Like, that's really helpful. So it does feel like, because it's all volunteer and because you're in the community of the fandom, it's a very like collaborative effort to try to keep people safe, which absolutely does not always work. But I think it catches a lot of things which make other parts of the internet feel bad.
Yeah, I love that. What are you both working on right now?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so V and I both have special interests. I sing as another hobby in a choir, and so I was like, what if choir pirates? You know what I mean? So I'm writing an Our Flag Means Death AU where one of the characters is a choir director and the other one's a conductor, and it's going to be very exciting. I really do want to say, though, I'm so excited because one of my pals made a podfic of a couple of the chapters already and inserted the choral pieces that I referenced. And it's one of the most, I was in tears. Like, it was one of the most unbelievable, touching things I've ever experienced in my life. Like, this person took the time to literally read my words, then put the music into it, and just the experience and people commenting like, wow, that was such a cool experience. I'm like, is this real life? This is so cool. So that's what I'm working on. And I'm so excited about it.
Yeah. So I, similar to Emily, am working on a large fanfic about my special interest, which is this true story from the start of World War II about an airplane that was flying from LA to Auckland when Pearl Harbor was bombed and had to return to the United States by going all the way around the other side of the world. And our intrepid captains from Our Flag Means Death are the two captains of the airplane. And it has just been a really fun experience. I called the museum that is about the real story to ask for some information. I've read a bunch of books. I've watched a bunch of videos of airplanes from World War II. So similar fun vibes. And the same as Emily, a dear friend of mine in the fandom is making a podfic of it. And she has this beautiful Australian accent, which makes everything sound even more fun. And she is a historian herself, and she inserted a lot of like period radio sounds and airplane sounds into the podfic. So I was also just like, I can't believe that you did this. I'm so touched. You're going to read 100,000 words that I wrote into a microphone. Thank you.
Fanfic is so great.
It's so great. It's so sweet. People do these incredibly nice things for free all the time, just for their friends, for their love of their friends. So,
and it, like, transformative works, like in every meaning of the word. If people want to find the pod, where can they find it?
Mind the Tags.
Yes, on Mind the Tags on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean. And just, ye old Google. If you Google it, I think you would find it as well.
We have a Blue
and we're
Sky
also on
account.
Blue Sky. We're on Blue Sky and Tumblr at Mind the Tags Pod.
Thank you both so much for coming on the show. It was just such a pleasure.
This is so fun.
It was really fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Today, paid subscribers got an Ask Ann Anything segment about what to do when it's still relatively early in your career and you already feel stalled out. So if you want to support the show and get bonus content, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, that exclusive advice time segment, and weekly discussion threads for each episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Culture Study Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, because we have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise that you don't want to miss any of them. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod, or check the show notes for a link. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.